My name is Sahara Carter. I'm 35, and my own family left me standing alone at an airport gate while they boarded a plane to Hawaii for a family vacation I had paid for. Before I tell you how their flight taking off led to my inheritance plans landing, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. That Tuesday morning at Honolulu International felt like a scene from a movie I didn't want to be in. The air was thick with the scent of coffee and the sweet, cloying aroma of Lay's being sold at a nearby kiosk. The PA system was a constant, unintelligible murmur, punctuated by the joyful shrieks of children who couldn't wait to hit the beach. It was a symphony of happiness, and I was the one sour note. They stood before me, a united front of cold indifference. My father, Richard, had his arms crossed so tightly, it looked like he was trying to hold himself together. His jaw was clenched, a little muscle twitching near his ear, a telltale sign of his stubborn anger. My mother, Helen, a woman who could normally fill any silence, was intensely focused on examining a loose thread on her purse strap. She wouldn't look at me. It was her signature move when she wanted to avoid a confrontation she had helped create. Then there was my older sister, Teresa. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, and she was soaking this moment in. A faint, smug smirk played on her lips. She looked me up and down, a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. Beside her, my brother Oliver and my younger sister Jasmine just looked trapped. They shuffled their feet, their eyes darting anywhere but at me, like guilty kids caught in the crossfire. This trip was supposed to be my olive branch. For months, I'd envisioned it as a chance to finally bridge the gap that had been widening between us for years. I felt that if I could just create the perfect environment, first-class seats, a presidential suite at a 5-star resort, all expenses paid, then maybe, just maybe, they would finally see me. Not the family ATM, not the weirdly quiet tech girl, but me, Sahara, their daughter, their sister. I had moved heaven and earth in my work schedule for this. Sahara, my father finally said. His voice was flat, sterile, like a doctor delivering bad news without emotion. There's been a change of plans. I kept my own voice carefully neutral, a skill I perfected over decades of dealing with them. A change of plans, Dad? I just drove 2 hours in rush hour traffic to get here. My mother finally glanced up. Her words were soft as silk, but woven with steel. We just think it's better this way. This trip, it's really just for the core family. The core family. The phrase slammed into me, knocking the air from my lungs. I was a supporting character in the story of my own family. You're always so buried in your work anyway, Sahara, Teresa added, her voice oozing a fake, syrupy concern that was more insulting than any overt hostility. We wouldn't want to be a distraction. They held all the cards. My ticket was somewhere in my mother's purse. They had already checked in online as a group. And now, here at the final gate, they were formally uninviting me. I scanned their faces one last time, a desperate, foolish search for a single crack in the facade, a hint of regret, a glimmer of affection. There was nothing, just a cold, polished wall of dismissal. A strange thing happened then. The frantic, desperate part of me that always wanted to please them, to beg for their approval, just went silent. It was replaced by an icy calm, the kind of calm you feel in the eye of a hurricane when the world stops spinning for a moment before the other side of the storm hits. I simply nodded. Okay. I didn't plead. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood back and watched them. One by one, they scanned their boarding passes. The cheerful electronic beep of the gate scanner sounded like a timer starting a new phase of my life. They walked down the jet bridge, a neat little line of people walking out of my life, and not one of them looked back. I remained there, a statue in the river of travelers, until the gate agent pulled the heavy door shut with a definitive thud. Then I turned. I walked away from gate B23, my footsteps echoing in my own ears. I went past the Cinnabon, past the duty-free, and headed for the quiet, understated elegance of the private aviation wing. The air here was different, calmer. At a polished marble desk, a woman in a sharp uniform greeted me by name. "Good morning, Ms. Carter. Your crew is ready when you are." A few minutes later, I was sinking into the plush cream leather of a Gulfstream G650, my jet. As the pilots began their pre-flight checks, I glanced out my window. Across the tarmac, I could see the massive Hawaiian Airlines jet, the one carrying my family, pushing back from its gate. I leaned my head back. The profound silence of the cabin was a welcome relief. I didn't need to shout to be heard here. I didn't need to fight for a seat. As their plane began its powerful ascent into the bright blue sky, my own jet taxied smoothly onto the runway. I picked up the sleek satellite phone from its cradle. "Jonathan," I said, my voice steady and clear. "It's Sahara Carter. There's been a change of plans. I'm en route to Chicago. Clear your afternoon. We need to restructure my entire life." As they flew toward their island paradise, I was flying toward my own liberation. The 8-hour flight to Chicago was like being in a decompression chamber, floating at 41,000 feet. The world below, the world that contained my family, seemed distant and insignificant. The flight attendant, a consummate professional named Claire, asked if I'd care for a glass of Dom Perignon, or perhaps the Wagyu steak for lunch. I politely declined. All I wanted was a bottle of still water and the vast, empty silence of the cabin. I stared out at the curve of the earth. The memories weren't just a flood. They were a meticulously curated exhibition of every time I had chosen to be their doormat. It was never just about the money. The money was the ink they used to write the story of my worthlessness in their eyes. The real story, the one that explained why a grown woman would tolerate this for so long, was rooted in shame. It was rooted in a Thanksgiving dinner 10 years ago. I was 25 and my world had just ended. My first startup, a little app I'd poured 2 years of my life and every dollar I had into, had crashed and burned. It was supposed to be a tool to help local mom and pop shops compete with big box stores. It was my passion, and it was a spectacular failure. I was broke, humiliated, and living on a friend's couch. I almost didn't go to Thanksgiving dinner, but my mother had insisted. "Don't be silly, Sahara. Of course you have to come. It's a family tradition." So I went. The house was filled with the warm, comforting smells of roasted turkey and cinnamon. Aunts, uncles, and cousins filled the rooms with loud chatter. I tried to make myself small, to blend into the wallpaper, but my father and sister wouldn't allow it. We were all seated around the long, polished dining table. My father stood at the head, brandishing a carving knife like a scepter. He paused, the knife hovering over the golden brown turkey, and fixed his eyes on me. "So, Sahara," he announced, his voice booming across the suddenly quiet table. "Your mother tells me your little computer game went belly up. Lost all your savings, I hear." Every eye turned to me. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. "It wasn't a game, Dad," I managed to say, my voice thin. "It was a company." Teresa let out a short, derisive laugh. She was already a junior associate at a big law firm and wore her success like a tailored suit. She dabbed her lips with a linen napkin and leaned back in her chair. "A company of one working out of a garage. Come on, Sahara. I told you this was a foolish idea. You're a dreamer, not a doer. Some people are meant to follow, not lead." "Your sister's right," my father declared, gesturing with the knife. "You're a disgrace to this family, chasing these childish fantasies. You should have gotten a real degree, a real job. Look at Teresa. She makes this family proud. What have you ever done?" A disgrace. The word, spoken in front of everyone I was related to, landed with physical force. No one defended me. My mother just looked down at her plate, busying herself with her mashed potatoes. In their silence, they all agreed. That night, lying on a lumpy couch that smelled like stale pizza, I made a vow. I would succeed. I would build an empire so vast they would drown in its shadow. But they would never see it. They would never be allowed inside. My success would be my secret fortress, built to protect me from the people who were supposed to protect me. I craved their approval so badly that I had to hide my entire life from them, terrified that they would find a way to tarnish it, to call it a fluke, to prove to me once and for all that I was, and always would be, a failure in their eyes. So I vanished into my work. I took on freelance coding jobs, working 18-hour days. I taught myself finance, marketing, corporate law, and I built my second company. This time with ruthless efficiency and absolute secrecy. And it worked. It more than worked. It became a silent giant in the tech world. But to them, I remained Sahara the consultant, the unimpressive, forgettable sister. They never asked for details because they weren't interested. Their interest only ever ignited when they needed something. Their needs became a constant drumbeat in my life. I remember Oliver's call like it was yesterday. He was a sophomore in college, and he was hysterical. "Sahara, I messed up," he'd wailed into the phone. "I bombed my midterms. They're revoking my scholarship. If Mom and Dad find out, they'll kill me. Teresa will call me a screw-up for the rest of my life. Please, Sahara, you're the only one who can help me. He swore up and down he'd learned his lesson, that he'd get a job, that he'd pay me back. The $50,000 for his tuition was in the university's account within the hour. His text read, "You're a lifesaver, sis. I owe you big time." 2 weeks later, his Instagram was a photo album of a spontaneous spring break trip to Cancun with his fraternity brothers. There was no part-time job. There was no paying me back. There was just another problem solved by his invisible older sister. Then Jasmine, my beautiful, artistic little sister, who believed her talent entitled her to a life of luxury. She ambushed me at a coffee shop with a portfolio of gorgeous fashion sketches and a business plan that was pure fantasy. "Just a small seed investment, Sahara," she pleaded, her eyes wide and sincere. $150,000. That's all I need to get my dream off the ground. You're so smart with business stuff. This is a sure thing. I tried to gently question her numbers. "Jazz," I said, "your cost of materials here is higher than your projected retail price." Her face hardened. "You just don't believe in me. You're being negative. Teresa said you'd be like this." The mention of Teresa was like a knife twist. I knew it was a terrible investment, but the thought of proving her and Teresa wrong, of helping Jasmine succeed where they expected her to fail, was too tempting. I wrote the check. She threw a lavish launch party, flew to Paris for a week of inspiration, and her company imploded within 18 months. When it was over, she didn't thank me for the opportunity. She blamed me. The seed money wasn't enough, she'd claimed. If you had really believed in me, you would have given me more. And the worst, the absolute worst, was Teresa, the golden child. She called me at 2:00 in the morning. Her voice a ragged whisper, a massive malpractice suit. She'd made a colossal mistake and was about to lose everything. Her job, her house, her license. "I'm ruined, Sahara," she croaked, the arrogance stripped from her voice for the first time in her life. "Ethan's already talking about leaving. It's all over." The dark, wounded part of me wanted to hang up. I wanted to say, "Welcome to the club, sister. Failure is a tough pill to swallow, isn't it?" But I couldn't. She was my blood, and the deeply ingrained programming to be the family's silent janitor, the one who cleans up all the messes, took over. "How much?" I asked. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. The number was obscene, more than $250,000. I wired it from a holding company account. Saved her career. Her thank you was a 2-word text, "Got it." Within a year, she was back to her old self, treating me with the same casual condescension as always, as if her moment of desperate need had never happened. My parents were no different. Health scares, home renovations, new cars, lavish vacations they'd post all over social media. I paid for it all. I was their secret benefactor, their invisible safety net. On the plane, high above the clouds, I finally saw it all with perfect, painful clarity. It wasn't a family, it was a system. A parasitic ecosystem where they fed on my resources and my desire for their love. And I was left drained and empty. I picked up the satellite phone and called Alex, my COO and only true friend. His face, etched with concern, appeared on the screen. "I thought you were supposed to be in Hawaii," he said immediately. I told him everything, the gate, the words, core family, my decision. Alex listened without interruption, his expression shifting from concern to a slow-burning anger on my behalf. When I finished, he just nodded. "Finally," he said, his voice firm with a loyalty I'd never gotten from my own blood. "I'm proud of you, Sahara. You've been letting them bleed you dry for a decade. So what's the play with Jonathan?" I looked out at the setting sun, a fiery gash across the horizon. "The play," I said, feeling a cold resolve settle into my bones, "is to cauterize the wound. All of it." Now, a rare, fierce grin spread across Alex's face. "Excellent. I'll get started on the paperwork for the R.M. Carter Foundation. I think naming it after your father is a masterstroke of psychological warfare." I knew he was half joking, but he was also right. It was a monument to the man my father could never see, built from the ashes of the family they had decided I wasn't a part of. As the plane began its final descent into Chicago, a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years washed over me. The turbulence was over. I was finally flying on my own. The offices of Blake & Associates occupied the top 2 floors of a gleaming skyscraper that scraped the clouds above the Chicago River. It was a place of quiet power where the hushed tones of phone calls could move markets and change lives. Jonathan Blake, my lawyer and mentor, was waiting for me. He was in his late 60s with a mind as sharp as the creases in his suit and eyes that missed nothing. He'd been the one to draft the initial articles of incorporation for my company when it was just me and a laptop. He knew the whole story. "Sahara," he said, shaking my hand firmly. His grip was strong, reassuring. "Your call was concise. I take it this isn't a social visit." "It's the most important business I've ever had, Jonathan," I replied, taking the seat opposite his vast oak desk. The city of Chicago sprawled out behind him like a map of my new future. I didn't waste time on emotion. I laid out the strategy with the same dispassionate precision I would use in a boardroom. "Phase 1, I began, is a complete financial quarantine. I want all recurring transfers, all credit lines, all access to any account I fund terminated for Richard Carter, Helen Carter, Teresa Carter, Olivia Carter, and Jasmine Carter. The cutoff is to be effective as of this moment." Jonathan listened, his pen making small, neat notes on a yellow legal pad. "Understood. We can have that executed within the hour." He paused. "They will feel that immediately." "That is the intention," I said. "Phase 2 is asset reclamation. I have 2 specific agreements I want to enforce." I handed him 2 manila folders. First, the seed investment of $150,000 made to JC Designs, LLC, owned by Jasmine Carter. She has been in breach of the performance and reporting clauses for over a year. I want to exercise my right to reclaim. Jonathan's eyebrow shot up. "Sahara, that's a kill shot. Her business is a house of cards. Pulling that support will fold it instantly." "A house of cards built with my money," I replied. "Let it fall." Second, the personal loan of about $250,000 made to Teresa Carter. It was structured with a clear repayment schedule, which she has ignored for 2 years. I want to issue a formal demand for immediate repayment of the full amount plus accrued interest. "Now that will be a fight," Jonathan warned, leaning forward. "She's a lawyer. She'll try to tie this up in court for years, claiming it was a gift. She's a cornered, sloppy lawyer who is about to be buried in her own debt. The loan agreement is ironclad, and you drafted it yourself. She'll posture, she'll threaten, but she has no case. She's counting on me being the same weak-willed sister I've always been. She's in for a surprise." Jonathan allowed himself a small, grim smile. "And phase 3? "I suspect this is the main event," I said. "My last will and testament." My voice dropped slightly. "It needs to be completely rewritten. As of today, I want to formally disinherit every member of my family. The new version will establish the R.M. Carter Foundation. 95% of my entire net worth, liquid assets, equity, properties, everything, will be transferred to the foundation upon my death." The odd RM were my father's initials, Richard Michael. It was the ultimate final irony, a legacy built in his name, a legacy he would never touch. "And the other 5%? Jonathan asked softly. "Split evenly between you and Alex Vance," I said. "For loyalty. It's the only currency that seems to have held its value." Jonathan put down his pen and looked at me, his gaze steady and serious. "You understand the magnitude of this, Sahara. This is not a dispute. This is an amputation. You are severing them from your life in the most absolute way possible. The fallout will be immense." "I've lived in the fallout of their choices my entire life, Jonathan," I replied. "It's time they experienced some of their own." While Jonathan and his team of legal sharks began to execute the plan, I could vividly picture the scene in Hawaii. My family, blissfully unaware, would be arguing over which expensive restaurant to go to for dinner. My father would be holding court, ready to slap down the credit card I paid for, soaking in the false glow of being the generous patriarch. The first inkling of trouble would be quiet. A waiter returning to the table, his expression apologetic. "I'm very sorry, sir, but this card has been declined." Confusion would turn to annoyance. He'd try another card. Declined. The embarrassment would start to set in. The real earthquake, however, would arrive 2 days later. A courier, looking crisp and official in the laid-back resort lobby, would deliver a thick, intimidating legal folio. Inside, printed on heavy bond paper, would be the cold, hard language of their new reality. Account freezes, loan recalls, the formal notice of intent to revise an estate plan. My phone, which I had placed on Jonathan's desk, began to vibrate. It skittered across the polished wood, a furious, buzzing insect. I didn't need to check the caller ID. It was my father. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, it started again. "Olivia." Ignored. Then Jasmine. Ignored. Then my mother. Ignored. The fifth call was from an unknown number. I knew it was one of them using a hotel phone. I decided to answer, to hear it. Sahara? My father's voice was a roar of disbelief and rage. What in the hell is going on? The bank just called. Our accounts are frozen. They're talking about foreclosure. What have you done? I've secured my assets, Dad, I said, my voice a calm counterpoint to his fury. Secured your assets? You've ruined us. You can't do this. We're your family. A family doesn't abandon one of its members at an airport thousands of miles from home. I heard a sputtering sound, then a frantic shuffling as the phone was passed. My mother's voice came on the line, high-pitched and trembling with panic. Sahara, sweetheart, please. This has to be a mistake. Your father is just overwrought. We can sort this all out. Just please tell the bank to release the funds. We can't even pay for our hotel room. They're threatening to lock us out. You should have planned your budget more carefully before you decided who was core family and who wasn't, I replied, the words like ice. And then she said it, the line that incinerated any remaining shred of doubt or pity. In a desperate, sobbing shriek, she revealed the pathetic truth. This is because of Teresa, she cried, the words tumbling out in a rush of self-preservation. She was the one who said you just ruined the trip for everyone. She said, your success makes everyone else feel like a failure, and we should just have one nice trip without that hanging over our heads. I knew we shouldn't have listened to her. So there it was. Not a misunderstanding, not a last-minute change. It was a premeditated act of cruelty, born from my own sister's poisonous envy. And my parents had been willing accomplices. The last thread of my old life snapped. Goodbye, Mother, I said quietly, and ended the call. I switched the phone off. I knew the war was far from over. Within the hour, Jonathan's personal email pinged. It was from Teresa, a long, rambling screed filled with legal threats, personal insults, and desperate bluffs. She was going to sue me for elder abuse. She was going to have me declared mentally incompetent. She was going to drag my name through the mud and expose me as a monster. I read the email over Jonathan's shoulder, and a profound, weary pity washed over me. She was threatening to burn down a house that had already been demolished. She was trying to tarnish the name Sahara Carter, a name that in the public eye barely existed. She had no idea who she was fighting. Let her, I said to Jonathan, a strange sense of peace settling over me. Let her file whatever she wants. Give her enough rope, and she'll hang herself with it. I left Jonathan's office and walked out into the crisp Chicago air. The city was alive, a vibrant tapestry of light and sound. For the first time, I felt like I was a part of it, not just an observer. The storm was coming for my family, but I was already in the clear. The weeks that followed were defined by a profound and unsettling silence. After the initial storm of furious calls and impotent legal threats, all communication from my family ceased. I knew better than to interpret this as acceptance. It was the unnerving quiet of a predator regrouping in the shadows, and I knew I had to remain vigilant. I threw myself into my work. The R.M. Carter Foundation became my singular focus. Alex and I worked 18-hour days interviewing potential board members, vetting grant applications, and planning the foundation's official launch, a major fundraising gala that would announce our presence to the world. There was a clean, satisfying feeling to it, like I was taking the toxic sludge of my past and transmuting it into something clean and powerful that could help others. The days were manageable. The nights, however, were a different story. My suite at the peninsula was a gilded cage. It had panoramic views of the city, a bed that felt like sleeping on a cloud, and a silence that was deafening. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my cloud drive, a digital archaeology of a life I was trying to bury. I was about to delete a folder labeled Holidays when I hesitated. I clicked it open. There it was, a photo from Christmas 5 years prior, the whole family crammed onto the sofa in front of my parents' fireplace. My father had on a ridiculous reindeer sweater, and my mother was laughing, her head thrown back. Oliver and Jasmine were wrestling over a gift. And I was there, tucked in the corner, a slightly forced smile on my face. But I was there. For a single deceptive frame, we looked happy. We looked like a real family. A wave of guilt, sharp and unexpected, hit me like a physical blow. The cold resolve I'd felt in Chicago began to fray at the edges. Had I been too harsh, too absolute? They were flawed, broken people, yes, but they were still my family. My mother had read me bedtime stories. My father had taught me how to ride a bike. Beneath the layers of resentment and entitlement, Weren't there still threads of love? My thumb hovered over my mother's contact info. My finger trembled. It would be so easy to call, to just check in, to restore one credit card, enough for them to live on. What was I trying to accomplish by grinding them into the dust? Was this justice? Or was it just cruelty? As I was about to press the call button, my phone lit up with an incoming call. It was Alex. His timing, as always, was borderline supernatural. "Step away from the phone, Carter," he said, his voice a calm command. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, a little too quickly. "Bull, I know you. It's 3 in the morning. You're alone. You're looking at old photos and thinking about caving. Don't do it. Remember why you're on that side of the country and they're on the other. Remember the airport? Remember what they called you on Thanksgiving. Hold the line, Sahara." I let out a long, shuddering breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "This is harder than I thought it would be, man." "No one said it would be easy," Alex replied, his voice softening. "You're detoxing from a lifetime of emotional poison. It's supposed to hurt. Just focus on the gala. 2 more weeks. We're almost there." He was right. I hung up the phone, closed the photo album, and forced myself to focus on the gala logistics. But my moment of weakness had shaken me. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that the silence from my family was a smokescreen for a frantic, desperate intelligence operation. And the operative in charge wasn't Teresa or my parents. It was Ethan, Teresa's seemingly sweet husband. I pieced this all together much later from various sources. Ethan was the true shark in the family. While Teresa was busy drafting hollow legal threats, Ethan was executing a meticulous, cold-blooded plan. He understood that brute force was useless. He needed leverage. He started his investigation with a simple premise. Sahara was lying, not just about her wealth, but about her entire life. He began digging online, not for Sahara Carter, tech consultant, but for any financial or corporate connections. He spent days sifting through public records, donation lists, and corporate filings. It was a needle in a haystack. His breakthrough came from a place of pure luck. Years ago, I'd made a small $5,000 donation to a local animal shelter where a friend of mine worked. It was an anonymous donation, but someone in their accounting department had made a clerical error and listed my full name, Sahara Michelle Carter, on a public list of donors in their annual report instead of just my initials. That was the thread Ethan needed. He pulled on it. He cross-referenced that name with other philanthropic databases. He started searching for the initials SMC. The pattern began to emerge. Larger and larger donations, all linked to those initials. He eventually found the SMC Fund, a private equity firm with a portfolio that was staggering. The final crucial piece fell into place when he stumbled upon a society blog mentioning the upcoming SMC Foundation launch gala. The blog post named a few of the high-profile board members and the host, David West. He didn't know my exact net worth or that I was the sole figure behind SMC, but he knew enough. He knew I was hosting a major event for the city's elite. He took his findings to a broken and desperate Teresa. He didn't present it as, "Look how successful your sister is." He framed it as a weapon. "Teresa, look at this," he would have said, his voice a perfect blend of outrage and strategic counsel. "She's not just cutting us off. She's hosting this ridiculous, extravagant party. She's laughing at us. This is our chance. This is our only leverage. We go there. We confront her in front of all her new important friends. We tell everyone what she's done. We shame her into helping us. What else can we do?" He played her like a fiddle, stoking the embers of her resentment and appealing to her vanity. He made her believe a public confrontation was a bold, righteous act. She thought it was her last stand. In reality, she was a puppet, and Ethan was pulling the strings, hoping to force their way back into a life of comfort and luxury. And so they planned their pathetic little invasion. They pooled the last of their resources for flights to Chicago. They picked out their best, most respectable clothes. They rehearsed their speeches of wounded indignation. They were marching into battle, utterly oblivious to the fact that they were walking onto a stage I owned, into a spotlight I controlled, about to play their part in a tragedy of their own making. The Drake Hotel's Gold Coast ballroom was a spectacle of understated opulence. The air itself felt expensive, scented with the perfume of thousands of fresh flowers and the collective wealth in the room. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, cast a warm, glittering light over the assembled guests. I saw a U.S. senator chatting with a tech billionaire, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author laughing with a renowned surgeon. This wasn't just a party. It was a nexus of influence and power, all gathered for a cause I had created. I was in a conversation with Mark Ellison, the formidable CEO of a publicly traded tech company and a new member of my foundation's board. He was a man I admired, not just for his business acumen, but for his integrity. We were discussing a new initiative when a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere made the hair on my arms stand up. The ambient, civilized hum of conversation faltered. A pocket of silence was spreading from the main entrance like a crack in a frozen lake. I turned and my heart stopped. There they were, framed in the grand, arched doorway. My family stood like a living tableau of desperation. They were horrifically out of place. My father's suit was too tight in the shoulders, its fabric shiny with age. My mother clutched her old handbag to her chest, as if it could ward off evil spirits. Olivia and Jasmine were pale, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe, clearly overwhelmed by the scale of the room. Leading the charge was Teresa, her face a mask of grim, rehearsed determination. And right behind her, his hand on her arm in a gesture of faux support, was Ethan. They looked like peasants who had stumbled into a king's court, and they were walking directly toward me. "Sahara," Mark murmured, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Friends of yours?" "A complication," I said, my voice tight as a guitar string. Teresa didn't wait. She closed the distance between us and, ignoring the tuxedo-clad guests who had to step aside for her, launched her attack. She didn't just speak. She projected her voice, aiming for maximum collateral damage. "Well, well, Sahara, so this is what you've been up to, throwing parties for all these strangers while your own family, the people who raised you, are left with nothing." The circle of silence around us expanded rapidly. Conversation ceased. Champagne flutes paused in midair. It was a social grenade, and Teresa had just pulled the pin. "Teresa," I said, my voice dangerously low, "this is not the time, and it is certainly not the place." "Oh, I think it's the perfect place," she shot back, her voice quivering with a mixture of rage and adrenaline, "a place where all your fancy new friends can see you for what you really are, a cold, cruel, heartless daughter who would let her own mother and father lose their home." My mother, right on cue, began to cry. Not loud, hysterical sobs, but the quiet, dignified tears of a long-suffering matriarch. "We just don't understand, Sahara," she whispered, her voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "How could you be so cruel?" It was a masterful performance. I had to give them that. To any outsider, it was a clear-cut case of a new money daughter abandoning her humble roots. I could feel the judgmental stares, the whispers starting to ripple through the crowd. The old, familiar shame began to prickle at the back of my neck. But then I looked past them, past their manufactured drama, and saw the giant screen behind the stage bearing the Foundation's logo, a bold, elegant SMC. I was not the person they thought I was. I was not the girl they had raised to feel small. Just as I was about to respond, a calm, authoritative voice cut through the tension. It was David West, the evening's host, a news anchor with a face recognized in millions of homes. He moved toward us, microphone in hand, his expression one of polite concern. He didn't look at my family. He looked directly at me. And in front of everyone, he spoke with a tone of profound, unquestioning respect. "Ma'am," he said, his voice amplified just enough to be heard throughout the ballroom. "Ms. Carter, I apologize for the interruption. Is there a problem? Do you require security to escort these individuals out?" The effect of those 3 words, "Ma'am, Ms. Carter," was more devastating than a physical blow. My family froze solid. Teresa's mouth, which had been open to deliver another volley of accusations, hung agape. They had come to confront Sahara, the screw-up sister. They were utterly unprepared to be faced with Ms. Carter, a woman who was addressed as ma'am by famous people, a woman who had security on standby. My father's face went slack, his eyes wide with utter confusion. My mother's tears stopped, as if a faucet had been turned off. They looked from David West to me and back again, their minds struggling to reconcile 2 completely different realities. I gave a slight shake of my head. "It's all right, David, thank you. This is a family matter that seems to have lost its way." But the spell was broken. The entire foundation of their attack had crumbled into dust. Mark Ellison, seizing the moment to end the spectacle, stepped forward. He placed a hand on my shoulder, a clear gesture of solidarity. He looked at Teresa, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. I don't believe we've been introduced, he said, but I have had the privilege of knowing S.M. Carter for several years, and I can tell you that the woman who created this foundation, the woman who has anonymously given away millions to support families in crisis, is the furthest thing from heartless I can imagine. So whatever this is about, I strongly suggest you find a more private venue. You are making a terrible mistake. S.M. Carter. Mark had said the name of the foundation, the initials of my father, Samuel Michael Carter. In the stunned, cavernous silence of that grand ballroom, I watched the final, catastrophic realization slam into my family. It was my father who connected the dots first. He looked from the massive SMC logo on the screen to me, then to Mark Ellison, a man he clearly recognized from the cover of Fortune magazine. His face drained of all color. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. Teresa just stared, her arrogance and rage dissolving into a pale, gaping horror. Sahara, SMC, her little sister, the disgrace, the failure. It was impossible. It was a category error in her brain. But the evidence was all around her. The opulent room, the powerful guests, the difference, the respect. All of it was screaming a truth her mind had refused to accept. They hadn't come to confront a black sheep. They had just discovered the black sheep owned the entire world they were standing in. Their plan to humiliate me had backfired with nuclear force, and they were standing at ground zero. The hotel security appeared without a word. Ghosts in sharp suits. Their presence alone a powerful suggestion. They didn't lay a hand on my family. They simply created a silent, unreachable perimeter, expertly maneuvering them away from the gawking crowd and toward a discreet door I knew led to the hotel's private library. I gave a brief, apologetic nod to Mark and David, a silent promise to explain later, and followed my family into the suffocating quiet. The heavy oak door clicked shut, muffling the sounds of the gala to a distant murmur. The room smelled of old leather and lemon polish. The five of them stood huddled together on a priceless Persian rug, looking small and broken beneath the gaze of the portraits of long-dead Chicago industrialists that lined the walls. All the fight had drained out of them, replaced by a pallid, sickened shock. Ethan, ever the opportunist, was the first to try and recalibrate. He took a step forward, his hands outstretched in a gesture of peace, his voice trembling with what I was sure was calculated vulnerability. Sahara, he began, we are so sorry. We didn't know. If we had any idea that you were this, we would never have... Be quiet, Ethan. The voice was Teresa's, but it was alien. All the bluster, the arrogance, the polished, lawyerly cadence was gone. It was a hollow, broken sound. She was staring at the intricate pattern on the rug as if it held the answers to the universe. For once in your life, she whispered, just be quiet. My father, looking 20 years older than he had an hour ago, finally found his voice. It was raspy, thin. S.M. Carter. Sahara. Michelle Carter, he repeated, as if trying to make the name make sense. I saw the foundation name online. I thought it was some kind of sick joke, a way to mock me. It was never a joke, Dad, I said, my voice devoid of heat. It was just a name. It meant something to me. Once. My mother collapsed into a wingback chair, her face in her hands. Her sobs were real this time, dry and racking. All this time, she wept. All this time you were this person, this important person, and you never told us. You let us think you were nothing. A spark of my old anger flared. Let you think? I stepped closer, not in rage, but in truth. I didn't have to let you think anything. You decided I was nothing long before I had anything. You decided it on Thanksgiving 10 years ago when you called me a disgrace in front of 30 people. What was I supposed to tell you? Hey, Mom, Dad, you know how you think I'm a complete failure? Well, I'm secretly a multimillionaire. What would that have changed? I looked each of them in the eye. Would you have suddenly been proud of me? Or would you have just seen a bigger wallet to draw from? Would your demands have just become more extravagant? Would you have loved me, or would you have just loved my money more? The truth of my words hung in the air, thick and undeniable. They had no answer, because we all knew what the answer was. You taught me that my ambition was a flaw, I said, looking from my father to my sister. You taught me that my dreams were an embarrassment. So I did what you taught me to do. I hid them. I hid everything. My success wasn't a secret I kept from you. It was a shelter I built to protect myself from you. Teresa finally looked at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed. her face a wreck of conflicting emotions. The jealousy was still there, but it was now dwarfed by a profound, soul-crushing shame. "But I was the one who did everything right," she choked out, the words tearing from her throat. "I went to the right schools. I got the right job. I made all the right choices. You were the screw-up. It doesn't make sense." "You did what you thought was right," I corrected her, my voice softer now. "You followed the map you were given. I had to draw my own. There's a difference." And then came the final, pathetic confession. The truth that underpinned their entire desperate charade. It was my father who said it, his voice a monotone of pure defeat. "We're broke, Sahara," he said, staring at the wall behind me. "There's nothing left. The house has a second mortgage we can't pay. The cars are leased. Our retirement accounts, they're empty." I stared at him confused. "Empty? That's impossible. I've given you so much money over the years." "It was a bad investment," he mumbled, his shame so palpable it was like a physical presence in the room. "A can't-miss opportunity, a luxury real estate development in Florida. It turned out to be a complete fraud. We lost everything we had, and everything you gave us." He took a ragged, shuddering breath and delivered the final, fatal blow to his family's deeply cherished myth of the golden child. "It was Teresa's idea," he said. "She did all the due diligence. She was our legal expert. She told us we'd double our money in a year." The silence that followed was stunning in its finality. Every eye in the room turned to Teresa, the brilliant lawyer, the daughter who made them proud. She hadn't just failed to achieve her own success. She had actively, incompetently destroyed theirs. Her entire life, her entire identity, built on the foundation of being the smart one, the responsible one, was a lie. She made a small, strangled sound and physically crumpled, sinking into a chair and burying her face in her hands. Watching them in their utter ruin, the anger that had been my fuel for so long finally sputtered and died. I had wanted accountability. I had wanted them to understand, but seeing them stripped bare, their pride and their lies in a pathetic heap on the floor, brought me no joy. There was no sweet taste of victory. There was only the bitter, metallic taste of grief. Grief for the family I had always craved. The one I now knew had never really existed. I had won. But I was alone on the battlefield. I turned and walked to the door. I spoke to the guard standing impassively outside. "Please arrange a car for them," I said quietly. "Take them wherever they need to go, and send the bill to my foundation's office." I walked back into the bright, noisy ballroom, back to my new life, feeling like a ghost haunting the ruins of my old one. The year that followed the gala was a year of profound and absolute silence. It wasn't the tense, strategic silence of before. It was the silence of a void. The angry calls, the manipulative texts, the desperate pleas for money. All of it ceased. They had fired their last shot, and it had ricocheted, blowing their own world to pieces. They had nothing left to say. I didn't go looking for information about them, but in a world as connected as ours, whispers find their way to you. I heard through a cousin who called me hesitantly after years of no contact that my parents had lost their home to the bank. The big, beautiful house I had grown up in, the one where I'd been called a disgrace, was gone. They had sold what little they had left and moved into a small 2-bedroom rental apartment in a town I'd never heard of, 3 states away. My father, who had never touched a tool in his life, was now working part-time at a hardware store. My mother was a receptionist at a dental clinic. Alex, through his own network, learned of Teresa's fate. She had been quietly let go from her law firm, the malpractice suit, and her subsequent financial ruin making her a liability. Ethan had left her within a month of the gala, unable to stomach the fall from grace. Teresa was now a public defender, a noble but grueling and low-paying job. The whisperers said she was a changed woman, quiet, haunted, stripped of her once insufferable arrogance. Olivia's story was a small, sad paragraph in a local business journal. JC Designs had been liquidated to pay off creditors. I heard she was working as a shift manager at a Zara in a suburban mall. A friend of a friend saw her there, patiently folding sweaters, her face a blank mask of exhaustion. It was a humbling public fall for someone who had always believed she was destined for the cover of Vogue. And Jasmine, my youngest sister, had been hit the hardest in some ways. Without my funding, she'd been forced to drop out of university. The life of leisure was over. She was working 2 jobs, a barista in the morning, a waitress at night, and living in a tiny apartment with 2 roommates. She was trying to pay off her student loans and save enough money to someday go back and finish her degree. Their safety net, me, was gone, and they had hit the ground hard. A part of me, the part that still remembered the sting of their cruelty, felt a cold, hard knot of justice. They were finally learning. But a larger part of me just felt a deep, resonant sadness. I had wanted them to see me, not to be destroyed. My own life, in contrast, was taking flight. The foundation became a force for good, a testament to the idea that from great pain could come great purpose. We launched scholarship programs, funded small businesses, and supported community projects. The work was demanding, fulfilling, and it began to fill the vast empty space my family had carved out inside me. I was building a new legacy, one defined by generosity, not genetics. I honestly believed I would never hear from them again, that the final brutal scene in the library was the end of our story. Then, about a year after the gala, a letter arrived. It wasn't a legal document. It was a simple, flimsy envelope addressed to my office in my mother's elegant, familiar script. I held it in my hands for a long time, the paper feeling both foreign and deeply familiar. My first instinct was to have my assistant shred it unread, but I couldn't. A stubborn, foolish flicker of something, maybe not hope, but curiosity, made me slide my finger under the seal. The letter inside was written on a single sheet of plain paper. My dear Sahara, I write this letter with no expectation that you will read it, and certainly with no right to hope for a reply. It has been a year, and I know for us it has been a year of difficult, painful, and necessary lessons. Your father and I are in a smaller place now. It's quiet. He has started a small garden in the backyard. He spends hours out there pulling weeds. He says it's good to feel the soil on his hands. He has never been a gardener. I think it's his way of trying to grow something new. Life is very different. We are learning to live on what we have, not on what we could ask for. It is humbling. I have heard news of your siblings. Teresa is quiet. She works very hard helping people who have nothing. I think she is trying to find a way back to herself. Olivia is managing a store. She is responsible and respected there. She told me last week that she's finally learned the difference between revenue and profit. Jasmine is working 2 jobs. She is tired, but she called me the other day and was so proud that she had finally saved her first $1,000 to go back to school. She is becoming a woman. There are no excuses for how we treated you, Sahara. Not for the airport, and not for all the years that came before it. We were blinded by pride and foolishness. We saw your success not as something to celebrate, but as a mirror that showed us our own shortcomings, and we resented you for it. We failed you as parents in every way that matters. I am not writing to ask for your forgiveness. That is not something we have earned the right to ask for, and I am not writing to ask for your help. We are learning, finally, to help ourselves. I am only writing to say what I should have said a lifetime ago. I am sorry. I am so deeply, truly sorry for not seeing the incredible, strong, and generous woman our daughter grew up to be, in spite of us. I hope you are well, Sahara. I hope you are happy. You have earned it. With love, Mom. I laid the letter on my desk and read it again and again. The words were simple, stripped of all the old manipulative flourishes. It was just the truth, a raw, heartbreaking, impossibly late apology. The old me, the fixer, would have been on the phone in an instant. I would have seen their struggle as my cue to swoop in, to solve their problems, to buy them a new house and pay off their debts, hoping that this time their gratitude would be real. But I wasn't that person anymore. I had learned the hardest lesson of all. You can't save people from themselves. Their struggles, their small, hard-won victories, Jasmine's $1,000, my father's garden, those were theirs. To interfere now would be to steal that from them. It would be to make them dependent all over again. So I didn't call. I didn't write back. Instead, I went to my desk and took out a simple, elegant business card. It belonged to a family therapist in their new city, a woman renowned for her work on healing estrangement and toxic family dynamics. I placed the card in a clean, crisp envelope. On a small, plain note card, I wrote just 7 words. If you are all truly ready to work. I mailed it. I had no idea if they would make the call. That part of the story was no longer mine to write. I had offered them a map and a compass. Whether they chose to take the first step on that long, difficult journey back to each other, and maybe, someday, back to me, was entirely up to them. I had finally let go. Benefits. Another 6 months drifted by, turning autumn into winter, then winter into a tentative spring. I made a conscious choice not to follow up, not to ask about the therapist. My own healing depended on my ability to detach my peace of mind from their choices. It was a daily practice, this act of letting go. My life bloomed in the space that my family's drama used to occupy. The foundation grew into a major philanthropic force. And I had met someone. His name was Daniel, a brilliant and witty architect who challenged my ideas and made me laugh. He was fascinated by how my mind worked, not by the size of my portfolio. For the first time, I was in a relationship that felt like a partnership, not a transaction. One brisk spring evening, I found myself on the campus of the University of Chicago. The foundation was a primary sponsor of the annual Student Innovation Expo, and I decided to slip in unannounced to see the projects firsthand. I loved the energy of these events, the raw ambition, the unfiltered passion. It reminded me of my own hungry beginnings. I was flipping through the event program when a name leapt off the page. Project, Campus Canteen, a food waste reduction initiative. Project led, Jasmine Carter. My heart gave a jolt. I found a seat in the back of the auditorium just as her team was being introduced. And there she was, my little sister. She looked taller, leaner. The last traces of girlish softness were gone, replaced by a focused intensity. She wasn't wearing a designer hoodie or trendy sneakers, just a simple button-down shirt and jeans. She looked like a woman who knew the value of $1. She stood at the podium and began to speak. She was articulate, passionate, and incredibly knowledgeable. Her project was a simple but ingenious app that connected the university's dining halls with local shelters and food banks to distribute leftover food at the end of each day. She talked about logistics, about nutritional value, about the dual benefits of feeding the hungry and reducing landfill waste. She handled tough questions from the panel of judges with a calm, steady confidence I had never seen in her before. She wasn't the spoiled girl who cried at cafes over a failed fantasy. She was a leader. She was an innovator. She was building something that mattered, on her own. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. A genuine, proud smile broke across Jasmine's face. As the applause died down, her eyes did a sweep of the room, a happy, searching look. And then, for a heartbeat, her eyes met mine. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, followed instantly by recognition. And then she did something that meant more to me than any letter or phone call could. She didn't look away in shame. She didn't give a desperate, pleading look. She just held my gaze from across the crowded room and gave me a single, small, respectful nod. It was a conversation without words. "I see you. I'm doing it on my own." I nodded back. "I see you too, and I'm proud of you." I slipped out of the auditorium before she had a chance to make her way through the well-wishers. The moment was complete. It needed no epilogue. Later that night, I stood on the balcony of my penthouse, the cool Chicago wind on my face. A year and a half ago, this same view had felt like the loneliest place on earth. Tonight, it just felt like home. My family and I would probably never be the smiling group in that old Christmas photo again. Some things, once broken, can't be perfectly repaired. But the anger had finally given way to acceptance. The gaping wound had become a scar, a part of my history, but one that no longer ached with every breath. I had learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is to let go, to let people find their own strength, even if it means they have to stumble and fall first. And I had learned that my own worth was never up for a vote. It was not something they could grant me or take away. It was something I had to build and claim for myself. I had lost the family I thought I wanted, only to find the woman I was always meant to be. And that was a victory that no one could ever take away from me. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope in some small way it resonated with you. Maybe you've never been left behind at an airport gate by the very people you worked yourself to the bone to support. Maybe your family never told you, explicitly or silently, that your dreams were a source of shame. Maybe they never called you a disgrace. But maybe you've had to make a hard choice, a painful one. Maybe you've looked at the people you love and realized they loved a version of you that was easy to control, a version who gave and gave, who never set boundaries, a version who stayed small so they could feel big. And maybe, like me, you reached the moment when you stopped asking for a seat at their table and built your own. If that's you, if you've been there or are there now, let me say this clearly. You are not alone. It's okay to let go. It's okay to choose peace over performance, wholeness over obligation, healing over history. It's okay to walk away from what breaks you, even if it's called family. That word doesn't have to be a prison. You get to define it. I found my family in a few loyal friends, in a partner who sees me for who I am, in a team that believes in my vision, and in the strangers whose lives we touch through the foundation. I didn't need DNA to create that. I just needed to stop bleeding for people who never bothered to bandage my wounds. The scars are still there, I won't lie. I still flinch sometimes when I get a phone call from an unknown number. I still feel a knot in my stomach every time I see a family photo pop up on social media with a caption like, "Grateful for my tribe." But those scars, they don't own me anymore. They're just reminders. Reminders of how far I've come, of how deep I dug to rebuild myself from the ruins, of how I stood alone, heartbroken but unbent, and said, "No more." So if you're standing in the rubble of a relationship that once meant everything, wondering if you're crazy for walking away, you're not. You're brave. You're strong. And maybe, just maybe, you're on the verge of becoming the version of yourself that you were always meant to be. If you're still here, thank you. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your own peace? Have you had to walk away from someone who didn't see your worth? Share your story in the comments below. And please don't forget to like and subscribe if this content speaks to your heart. More stories are coming, real ones, hard ones, beautiful ones. Until then, take care of yourself. You deserve a life that feels like yours. Sahara Carter,